Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen, and enjoy my stories every day. The realization hit me slowly, creeping in like a shadow over the life I'd spent over a decade building. I never considered that the laughter over her phone late at night, the distant look in her eyes, or the sudden interest in working late, could mean anything more than the usual strains of marriage. But looking back, I wondered if maybe some part of me always knew. We were that couple everyone envied, two beautiful kids, a comfortable home, and a strong foundation that seemed unshakable. I thought we were immune to the cracks that fractured other relationships. Little did I know, we were anything but. It started with subtle changes. My wife, let's call her Laura, had always been open about her friends and her work. I knew the names of her colleagues, the funny quirks of her boss, and the dramas of her office life. But then, her updates began to fade, and a new name slipped into her conversations here and there, just casually enough not to raise alarm. Dan, from accounting, she'd say, mentioning his knack for bad jokes or his penchant for showing up late. It was innocent enough, until it wasn't. One Friday night, I was up late working on a report when I heard her laugh from the other room. I remember glancing at the clock, nearly midnight. She'd texted a few friends before, but there was something different about the way she laughed, something private that didn't include me. I shrugged it off, but then she kept texting, face glowing from the screen's light. When I tried to start a conversation with her, her replies were clipped, her attention clearly focused on something, or someone, else. Another night, when she got up from the couch, her phone lit up. Out of pure curiosity, I glanced over. The name, Dan, appeared on the screen with a message that read, "Can't wait to see you Monday." It was casual, yes, but something in me flared up. Maybe it was my own insecurities, or maybe it was the fact that she'd mentioned nothing about seeing him outside work. I let it go that night, telling myself not to jump to conclusions. But things escalated, and fast. Her evenings grew longer, her texts to Dan more frequent. She'd mention work dinners, with a casualness that seemed rehearsed, almost too smooth. There was a shift in her behavior too, subtle, but enough that it caught my attention. She was more distant, less interested in the little things we used to share, like our evening walks or watching our favorite shows together. Instead, she'd sit across the room, engrossed in her phone, typing away furiously with a smirk she tried to hide. The unease was too much. So, one afternoon, while she was out, I finally allowed myself to do something I never thought I would, check her phone records. I hated myself for it. I'd always believed in trust, in giving each other space. But I was slowly realizing that I might be the only one holding up that ideal. Scrolling through the numbers and times of her recent texts, I saw the name, Dan, far too frequently. Texts at all hours, late into the night, on weekends, even during our supposed family time. Each instance felt like a punch to the gut. But what could I do? Confront her? Accuse her based on a few innocent texts? I had no solid proof, only a gut feeling that I was desperately trying to deny. I decided to wait, to watch. I figured if something was really happening, it wouldn't stay hidden for long. Over the next few weeks, I was alert, noticing every little behavior that could betray her. I'd catch her smiling at her phone, or she'd quickly swipe away a notification whenever I entered the room. Each time, I'd feel that knot of suspicion tighten, but I forced myself to act casual. I knew that one false step could alert her, and then the truth would be even harder to uncover. But the breakthrough came one evening, in a way I never anticipated. We'd been out to dinner, just the two of us, an attempt to rekindle some of the closeness we'd lost. I'd noticed that she was distracted throughout the meal, and I made a joking comment about her being somewhere else tonight. She laughed it off, but the light in her eyes seemed dim, as if she were somewhere far away. Later, on our way home, she casually mentioned a work trip planned for next week. I almost missed it, the way she slipped in that detail. She'd never mentioned it before, and the way she brought it up felt off, like she was testing the waters, seeing if I'd buy it without a second thought. I kept my face neutral, pretending to listen while inside, a storm was brewing. I realized then that she was lying, maybe not about everything, but enough to confirm my worst fears. As the days passed, I braced myself for what I'd find. I waited for her work trip with a mixture of dread and anger, my mind torn between hoping I was wrong and preparing for the worst. I spent the days leading up to her work trip in a fog, balancing my time between work, the kids, and the creeping paranoia that had taken root in my mind. I couldn't ignore the signs anymore, something wasn't right, and I needed to know the truth. That weekend, while she packed her things for the trip, I watched her carefully, searching for any hint, any small detail that would betray her. She was so calm, humming a tune as she moved between the bedroom and the closet, stacking folded clothes neatly into her suitcase. I couldn't tell if it was my imagination, but it felt like she was putting on a show, like she wanted to convince me everything was fine. When she finally zipped up her suitcase, she glanced at me with a casual smile. "I'll be gone just for 2 nights. Don't worry, I'll be home by Tuesday evening." I nodded, feeling a tightness in my chest, a mix of anger and betrayal I was trying hard to hide. "Have a good trip," I managed, forcing a smile that probably looked more like a grimace. I had the next steps planned. While she thought I'd spend the weekend with the kids, maybe catching a game on TV after they were in bed, I was planning to take a deep dive into her world, starting with her phone records. When she left the house, the kids were out with their grandparents, giving me time to begin my search. I headed to our home office, fired up the computer, and pulled up her call logs. The texts from Dan were frequent, spanning the entire day and well into the night. A few of the timestamps showed her texting him even when we were supposed to be spending time together, watching a movie or just having dinner. Seeing the evidence in front of me hurt more than I'd expected. It wasn't just texts. She had call records too, some of them lasting for over an hour. I traced back through several months, watching as the frequency increased. My heart sank. This wasn't a fling or a passing attraction. Whatever she was involved in, it had clearly become something significant, something that mattered enough for her to risk everything we'd built. The next night, unable to shake my suspicions, I decided to follow her. I knew the hotel she'd mentioned before leaving, a small, upscale place a few towns over that her company often booked. My hands were shaking as I typed the address into my GPS, telling myself I was only going to check, to see if she was really there and maybe ease my mind. But part of me knew that I was already too far gone, that no amount of rationalization could change what I'd become determined to find out. When I arrived, the lobby was quiet, the kind of hushed, dimly lit atmosphere that felt too intimate for a business trip. I waited in my car, heart pounding as I watched the entrance. About 30 minutes later, a cab pulled up, and there she was, stepping out with Dan. They were laughing as they walked toward the entrance, her arm linked with his. It was like a scene from a bad movie, the kind of thing you tell yourself only happens to other people. But here I was, watching my wife with another man, the reality of it slicing through me like a knife. I didn't confront her then. Instead, I sat there, stunned, watching them disappear into the lobby, realizing I needed more than just a glimpse if I was going to make this right. I pulled out my phone and took a photo as they walked away, proof I knew I'd need. The drive home was a blur. I barely registered the roads, only the pounding in my chest, the rising anger and hurt. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the way she'd done it, the lies, the charade. All those late nights, the texts, the so-called work trips. She'd woven a web so carefully, counting on my trust, on the life we'd built, as if she thought I'd never suspect a thing. When I finally pulled into our driveway, I turned off the engine and sat there in the darkness, wondering what my next step would be. For the rest of the weekend, I acted like nothing was wrong, keeping up appearances for the kids. But inside, I was a storm. When Laura came home on Tuesday evening, she walked through the door with that same casual smile, dropping her suitcase by the entryway. I watched her, knowing she was waiting for me to ask about her trip, to inquire about the conference she'd supposedly attended. Instead, I simply nodded at her, murmuring a quiet, "Welcome back." The tension must have shown on my face because her smile faltered briefly, but she recovered quickly, busying herself with unpacking. I wanted to confront her then and there, to scream, to demand an explanation, but I knew I had to be smarter than that. There were kids to think about, a life I wasn't ready to dismantle in a single heated confrontation. Over the next few weeks, I continued collecting evidence. I followed her again on another work trip and caught them together once more, each sighting confirming what I already knew. Every late-night text, every lingering smile she gave her phone, it all pieced together the ugly truth. She wasn't just cheating, she'd crafted an entire world of lies to cover it up. One night, after the kids were asleep, I finally took her phone and snapped photos of her call logs and messages with Dan. I needed to have everything in hand when the time came to confront her. It would be my proof, my armor, my way to ensure that whatever happened next, I wouldn't be the one caught off guard. With all my evidence in place, I made a call to a lawyer. I didn't know how this confrontation would play out, but I knew one thing: I was done pretending. The lies, the betrayal, they had stripped away any illusion of the marriage I thought I had. Now, it was about securing what mattered, about making sure that she couldn't just walk away unscathed after everything she'd put me through. As I hung up the phone, I looked around our home, the house we'd bought together, filled with memories and the laughter of our kids. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. It was time to confront Laura. It was time for her to know that I knew. When the moment came, I felt strangely calm, as if everything inside me had gone quiet. After weeks of internal chaos, sleepless nights, and countless scenarios playing out in my mind, I was left with a single purpose. I'd built up to this, gathered my evidence, fortified myself against whatever words she might throw at me. I waited until the kids were at a friend's house for a sleepover, leaving the house silent, neutral. Just me and her. Laura had just finished dinner, scrolling absently on her phone when I sat across from her at the table. She looked up, and for a split second, I could see confusion flash in her eyes. She was expecting another quiet evening, maybe a movie together, some surface-level small talk. Instead, I pushed my phone across the table, the screen open to the photo of her and Dan at the hotel. She blinked, the casual smile fading from her face, her eyes widening as she glanced down. There was a long, terrible pause. "Explain," I said, the word leaving my mouth colder and sharper than I'd intended. She looked down at the phone, then back up at me, her face pale. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice shaking slightly, an edge of desperation already creeping in. "You know exactly what it is," I replied, the calm settling deeper, anchoring me. I could feel the words I'd practiced in my mind ready to spill out, but I stayed quiet, letting her reaction guide me. She pushed the phone back across the table, folding her arms tightly against herself. It's not what it looks like," she started, her voice barely above a whisper. The denial was laughable, and I couldn't help but let out a hollow, humorless laugh. "Really? So you weren't with Dan? You weren't staying with him at that hotel?" I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "Because I have other photos, Laura. Texts. Call logs. So why don't you go ahead and tell me exactly what it is, because I'd love to hear it." Her mouth opened and closed, like she was trying to find the right words to twist her way out of this. For a moment, I thought she might launch into a confession, a tearful apology, the kind of response I had half expected. But instead, she straightened up, her face hardening as she looked back at me, her eyes narrowing. "So you were spying on me," she said, her voice gaining strength. "You invaded my privacy. That's low, even for you." I laughed again, incredulous. "Low? You're really going to accuse me of going low?" I felt a pulse of anger break through my calm. "Laura, I wasn't the one sneaking around. I wasn't the one lying about work trips and late nights. I wasn't the one having an affair." She flinched, a flicker of something, guilt. Regret, flashing in her eyes, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. She stood up, crossing her arms. Fine, she said, her voice steady. I admit it. Yes, Dan and we've been seeing each other. But it's not like you think. Not like I think. I repeated, feeling a bitter taste rise in my mouth. How else am I supposed to see it? You lied to me, to our family, Laura. Do you have any idea what that's done to me? To us? Her face softened slightly, a hint of remorse finally breaking through. I didn't mean for it to get this far. It just happened. You were always busy with work, the kids, and I felt invisible. I didn't plan it, but he listened. He cared. Her voice broke slightly, and she looked away. I wanted to feel something at that moment, anger, pity, anything other than the hollow ache that had taken root. And so, what? You thought betraying me, breaking our family, was the solution? I asked, my voice soft but sharp. Laura took a shaky breath, her gaze falling to the floor. No, it's just. I don't know. I didn't want this to happen, but it did. And it made me realize I'm not happy, Mark. I'm not happy in this marriage. I didn't mean to hurt you, but I need something different. I let the words hang in the air, feeling each one like a cold, calculated blow. For years, I'd thought we'd been building a life together, creating something meaningful. Now, with a few sentences, she'd reduced it all to a question of her own unmet desires, her need for something different. Then why didn't you just talk to me? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Why did you have to destroy everything we built just because you were unhappy? She shook her head, wiping away a tear. I don't know. Maybe because I thought you wouldn't understand. You're so focused on what's practical, what's next, that I felt like I was losing myself. Dan helped me find that again. Her words stung, but not as much as her gaze when she said them. So what now, Laura? What's your grand plan? I leaned back, folding my arms across my chest, feeling the wall between us grow higher and colder. She hesitated, looking away. I don't know. I didn't expect you to find out like this. I want to find a way to make it work, maybe give us both some space, figure out what we really want. I let out a slow breath, feeling the last shreds of the life I'd known slipping away. Space, I repeated. So you're suggesting we just keep this going, what, so you can keep seeing him? No, it's not like that, she said quickly, a defensive edge to her tone. I just need time to figure things out. Figure things out? I repeated, the bitterness returning to my voice. Laura, I've already figured it out. You broke my trust. You lied. And now you're asking me to just go along with whatever half-baked plan you come up with? She dropped her gaze, wringing her hands together. I know it sounds bad. I know. But I still care about you, about us, and I don't want to just throw everything away. Can't we try to work through this? The words sounded hollow to me, like a script she'd rehearsed but didn't truly believe. I stared at her, feeling the weight of years, of memories, of the life we'd shared. No, Laura. You already threw everything away the moment you chose him over us. The moment you decided I wasn't enough. Her face crumpled, and for a brief moment, I felt a pang of sympathy. But it was quickly replaced by the cold reality of what she'd done. I pushed back from the table, standing up. I think we're done here, I said, my voice final. I'll take the kids tonight, and I'll call my lawyer in the morning. This is over, Laura. Whatever we were, whatever we had, it's done. She reached out, as if to stop me, but I took a step back. Don't, I said, the word heavy with everything I couldn't bear to say. You've made your choice. Now, you'll have to live with it. I left her standing there, my heart heavy but my mind resolute. For the first time in weeks, I felt a strange, painful clarity. The life we'd built, the love I'd thought was unbreakable, was over. And though the road ahead would be long and filled with countless questions, I knew one thing for certain: I was finally free from her lies, free to rebuild what she'd broken, and free to find my way forward, without her. Months passed after I filed for divorce. Laura and I settled into a tense, silent routine as we sorted out the logistics of splitting a life we'd shared for over a decade. The house was up for sale, and we'd worked out a temporary custody schedule for the kids. Every time we crossed paths, there was an emptiness in her eyes I couldn't ignore, but I brushed it off as guilt. She'd made her choices, and I was done trying to understand them. The kids sensed the shift. Emma had grown quiet, withdrawing into her room more than ever, and Josh, our youngest, looked at us both with worried eyes whenever we sat him down to explain the changes. It gutted me to see them hurt, to see them lose the family they'd known. The thought of them bouncing between homes, losing the stability Laura and I had once worked so hard to provide, broke something inside me. I tried to stay strong, to hold it together for them, but I could see in their faces that they were already drifting, already adapting to a life that felt fractured and raw. I poured myself into work, staying late at the office, volunteering for projects I would have dodged before. Anything to avoid the empty house, the silence that settled in every room now that Laura had moved out. We had agreed that she'd take an apartment nearby, close enough for the kids to visit easily, but every time I drove by her place, an anger I couldn't shake resurfaced. I would look up at her window, sometimes seeing the silhouette of her with the kids, and it made my chest feel hollow. One late night, I got a call from Emma. Her voice was shaking, barely holding back tears. "Dad. Mom hasn't been answering her phone," she whispered. "I think something's wrong. Can you come?" My heart leapt into my throat. "I'll be right there," I said, grabbing my keys and heading out the door. The drive was a blur, my mind racing with worry and confusion. When I pulled up to Laura's apartment, Emma and Josh were standing outside, looking small and terrified in the dim glow of the streetlights. Emma rushed to me as I got out of the car, her voice cracking as she clung to my jacket. "I don't know what happened." She said she wasn't feeling well, went into her room, and she didn't come out. I tried knocking, but... "Stay here," I told her, trying to keep my voice steady. I went up to Laura's apartment with Josh close behind. The silence in the place was eerie. I made my way to her bedroom, a sense of dread settling over me as I reached for the doorknob. I found her lying there, motionless, a half-empty bottle of pills beside her bed. She looked peaceful, her face free from the tension I'd seen in those last months. For a moment it felt like she was simply asleep, but when I shook her shoulder, calling her name, she didn't respond. I felt a wave of panic, my voice breaking as I yelled her name again, but it was too late. I sank to the floor beside her, unable to process the reality of what had happened. The next hours were a nightmare. The ambulance came, paramedics confirming what I already knew but didn't want to accept. Emma and Josh clung to me, their sobs breaking the silence as they tried to make sense of something they couldn't possibly understand. I felt hollow, like a shell of the person I'd been, sitting there in her empty apartment, realizing that the finality of her absence was something none of us could escape. The days that followed were a haze of arrangements and explanations, of tearful phone calls to family and friends who couldn't believe what had happened. I couldn't believe it either. Despite everything, despite the betrayal and the pain, I never imagined it would end like this. Part of me had always thought that maybe, over time, we'd find a way to coexist, to co-parent peacefully, to rebuild some semblance of normalcy. But now that was gone, shattered by a decision I couldn't understand. In the weeks after, I found myself going through her things, searching for any sign, any hint of what had led her to this. She'd seemed distant, yes, but there'd been no outward signs, no clue that she'd been struggling to the point of giving up. In a drawer by her bed, I found a small journal, tucked away under a pile of old photos. The entries were sparse, fragments of thoughts she'd scrawled in moments of quiet desperation. One line stuck with me, etched into my mind as if it had been written for me to find, I've broken everything that mattered, and I don't know how to fix it. I sat there, holding her journal in my hands, feeling the weight of everything we'd lost, everything that had slipped away because of choices made in moments of weakness, moments neither of us could take back. I'd been so focused on the betrayal, on the hurt, that I hadn't seen the depths of her own regret, her own sadness. She had felt trapped, lost in a life that no longer made sense to her. And in the end, that sadness had consumed her. In the months that followed, I struggled to rebuild for myself and for the kids. Every day was a reminder of what we'd once had, of the family we'd built, now fractured beyond repair. Emma and Josh became my anchors, the only constants in a world that felt foreign and cold. They looked to me for stability, for hope, and I tried my best to be the father they deserved, even as my own heart ached with a sadness I couldn't escape. There were nights I lay awake, haunted by memories of Laura, wondering if things could have been different if I'd tried harder, if I'd seen the signs earlier. But there was no comfort in those thoughts, only a deep, aching regret for what might have been. And though life went on, and the kids grew and adapted, there was always a part of me that carried that grief, a reminder of the fragile, fleeting nature of love, of trust, and of the life we'd once shared. In the end, I learned to live with the emptiness, the quiet spaces Laura had left behind, and I moved forward as best as I could, cherishing the moments I had with Emma and Josh, holding them close, knowing that life would never be the same.